You are listening to the Extreme Metal Podcast Necropolis, which is brought to you by Jason from Goatcraft and Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion Magazine. Welcome to Necropolis. This is the 50th episode of Necropolis. We've gone a long way since the pandemic. And I am Jason, the Master of Ceremonies, also known as Lone Goat from Goatcraft. We do have co-host Shelly returning today from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion Magazine. Thank you, Shelly, for coming back.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we have Mike Hill from Tomb Scorpion Throne and Everything Went Black Media. I saw the Scorpion Throne last week. This the debut. It's more of like a black metal project, more black metal than Tombs, I would say. And I thought it was pretty good. So I wanted to invite Mike on the podcast to talk about that as well as Tombs and anything else that might come up, because this guy is a very prolific figure within the metal scene. He has his own media company podcast with Everything Went Black Media. He has been a writer for numerous publications. He's a producer of music. He's into Muay Thai. And I also saw something on the internet about him having his own coffee company. So many things that this guy has been involved with. So he's going to be a really great guest today. So I want to thank you for coming on the program, Mike.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's appreciated.
Yeah, of course. So just kind of Googling Tombs, and the past few days, I've really soaked my psyche into the music. Initially, I had some difficulty wrapping my mind around what type of genre it is and where the influences are. And yesterday, I actually looked up the Wikipedia page, which I never want to do about bands because who knows what's actually accurate on there. But I saw like Swans was an influence, Joy Division, things of that nature. And I kind of see that post-metal tag being thrown around about Tombs. And I can kind of draw that parallel from Swans and Joy Division being in that post aspect. Post is usually like, rock or indie rock and things of that nature, goth music being assimilated under that post label or post punk as well. So just kind of delve into your influences. What are your actual influences? Is Wikipedia correct, or like, do you feel that you're such a career musician, being involved with metal so long, that you just have like this mass assimilation of influences, and the way you're able to communicate is through those? And do you feel that is essentially just second nature nowadays for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know about like post metal or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, I know, maybe I've seen that thrown around, but like, hipster metal or whatever you want to call it. I mean, anyone who's ever seen me play live or has known me in person would probably attest to the fact that I'm not a hipster, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, man. I like extreme music. I like, Slayer, Black Flag, Sabbath, Venom. But I also like Fields of the Nephilim, the Swans, and Joy Division. And, I don't really sit down and decide, okay, I'm going to write a record that sounds like, this. It just, I try to like write music that comes from the heart and is like an accurate representation of the emotions I'm feeling and that sort of thing. And that's what happens. That's why there's such a variety of different textures and ideas and, stuff like that gets thrown into the catalog of music that we have. I would get bored if I was only allowed to play just like, okay, you can only write songs with blast beats in it, and it has to be like 200 BPM. Otherwise it's not going to, make whatever category somebody wants to put us in. And, I just don't play by those rules, man. I play by my own rules, I guess.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And I was having a lot of difficulty, kind of just categorize it. And eventually I came to the conclusion that it's kind of like Triptychon with Tombs, where, they draw in a lot of different influences, goth and post-punk and all of that.
Sure.
and they're able to execute, some very, very catchy melodies. And, and everything that I noticed about your music is that a lot of the songs, there's like purpose to each individual section. You know how a lot of bands will have kind of like a riff salad, especially with OSDM nowadays, where it's kind of composed and it's like riffs that sound cool, but once they're stitched together, it's just kind of riff salad. But your music there's like a narrative structure. Each place in the song has its purpose to drive the song along. So when you approach the songwriting process, do you like conceptualize the entire song rather than bits and pieces within it?
It kind of varies, actually, because I mean, there are some songs that I've written like in one sitting, like, okay, it just comes out and this is the way it is and it makes sense. And, I'll make like a demo recording of it and I'll send it to the other guys and everyone's cool. Oh, this sounds great. Let's go for it. And then lately it's been like revision after revision after revision. Like we're demoing material right now for like the next record. Two tracks we're working on, and one of them is version 6 and the other one's version 7. So they're like an amalgamation of all these different ideas that I've been working on for the past, actually in one case, it's been an entire year that I've been playing around with this one song. And that's not typical. I mean, typical, it's a little bit quicker than that, but it's really a case by case basis. Cause like, this one particular idea is like, all right, I really want to make sure that this is fully realized and, and done the right way. And I'm not going to have any regrets when I record it finally and look back on it and be like, well, maybe I should have did it this way. So that one has grown and changed. And there's been parts of other demos that I abandoned that have been incorporated into this new song. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like, there has to be like, a purpose for everything. There has to be like a place for all the different parts, and there has to be a story. And, I mean, obviously I love music, but I also I would say I'm almost these days more influenced by writing and films, not so much in this like pretentious way where like, oh, I'm writing a score, but like the way there's a storyline, the way there's like a beginning, a middle, and end. And that's how I approach songwriting, similar to, I love reading. So you read a story, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think music should follow that same trajectory. And that's pretty much my approach to it. I mean, I don't just throw things, all right, we need to have like this part, and I just rather everything be efficient and serve a purpose and carry the story of the song. And that's pretty much my approach to it.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
A problem that I hear in a lot of modern music is they tend to be overly fixated on their influences, and they do try to chuck everything in the kitchen sink into their music without really necessarily thinking about the story aspect of it. And I think that is a really undervalued kind of trait of music. And it's interesting that you reference like literature and so on, because sometimes that comes through in music. You can tell that it is trying to convey that narrative aspect and making sure that every single aspect serves that purpose. And yeah, I think that is a problem with a lot of modern metal, is it's so keen on just chucking different elements and different influences in without necessarily thinking about that wider, broader picture. It's important.
Yeah, I agree, man, totally. And that's not to say I don't love music that is, just like we just finished a tour with Origin, and those guys are just like, technical, and that's their purpose, is to write technically challenging music that's like interesting and pushes the limits of speed and, really fast tempos. And that's their trip, and that's not, well, first of all, I can't play that like that, number one. And that's just not something that for me creatively is interesting to do in a band. Like, even if I had the abilities of Paul Ryan, which that guy's like an incredible guitar player, like, I don't think I would express myself that way, but that's his voyage and mine's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm actually on one of the Origin albums, Omnipresent, and I did some synthesizer stuff on there. And Paul, I love Paul, and yeah, you're certainly right. Like, he plays a million miles an hour, and it's just like, how the hell does he do those flurries of arpeggios?
Yeah, those guys are incredible, man.
And they're so friendly too. I remember one time I had gone into their tour bus and drank all their beer, and they didn't give a shit. So, very, very friendly guys. And eventually, Paul will come on this podcast. He's already agreed to it. Just need to sync up, and
Excellent.
Great guest too. So going back to the narrative structure about the songs and the concepts that you're working with, I saw the new EP from Tombs, which I wanted to bring this up later in the podcast, but now is a good time. It's called Ex Oblivion, and that is based on the short story by H.P. Lovecraft, which happens to be my favorite short story by Lovecraft for, I don't know if for the same reasons that you have, but essentially you're welcome to say the story, but H.P. Lovecraft was greatly influenced by the works of Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher, when he wrote that, and kind of the ending of Ex Oblivion is kind of reminiscent on like what's at the end of, like the conscious experience of, day-to-day life. And when you delve into like Schopenhauer's works, he boils everything down to pretty much just determinism, that, we're here just to have kids and reproduce. But underneath that reality, there's like a great metaphysical will that drives us to do so. But it doesn't really take in consideration our conscious experiences and all that. And at the end of Ex Oblivion, it's all about diminishing that conscious experience.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's I wouldn't say our song is like it's inspired by that concept, but it's not like a retelling of that story necessarily. I mean, I also would throw like Thomas Ligotti is like more. I would say Ligotti is probably more inspired by Schopenhauer than Lovecraft, really. And the two concepts I was kind of playing around with were, there's a story by Ligotti called The Darkness, the Shadow, which is like, basically addressing the same topics that you were discussing when you were talking about Ex Oblivion. And, a lot of that, like that story essentially is like someone wondering about what lies beyond the portal of life. And then there's, the consciousness like coming up with these fantasy worlds of like, okay, there's like this beautiful garden or city on the other side of this doorway. And then when it's too late, you realize the doorway's open, and then you see just blackness beyond that. And that's, that follows my very bleak worldview as well. And so, I mean, that feeling is what went into the Ex Oblivion track that we did. And to differentiate it, we spell it differently than the Lovecraft story. He has an E on the end of Ex Oblivion or whatever you pronounce that. And going into your martial arts experience, like Muay Thai, another correlation that I can make to that is like when someone gets knocked the fuck out and they go black, it's kind of like, ending the consciousness for a second there, and they come back and they're like all disoriented and all of that, but they're it's like, oh yeah, I'm alive, I'm experiencing life and all this. But that moment when they get knocked out, those lights go out and they pass through that gate. Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've never been knocked out. I've been choked unconscious in jiu-jitsu before, but I've never been KO'd in Muay Thai. I've been hit pretty hard and rocked pretty hard, but I've never lost my consciousness through that sport. But one time I was training jiu-jitsu, and I was like, what happens if I don't tap to this choke? And this narrowing portal of just like this, everything turned into this like really small circle, and then there was this blackness, and then
so
I don't know how long I was out, probably just a few seconds, I imagine. And then I woke up and everyone was like standing around me, and I was like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine.
I had a very similar experience. I was in the Air Force, but off duty, UFC was really big at the time. We would spar behind the barracks, and someone got me in a headlock, and they didn't like cut off the airflow; they just cut off the blood flow.
Yeah, it was a blood choke. Yeah,
and all of a sudden, it's like I'm waking up off the ground. It was like, what the fuck? Like, just crazy. Crazy, very disorienting when you come back from something like that. And pass through that gate for a moment there and come back to reality. It was like, okay, the survival instinct comes back too, where
I'd much rather get get choked unconscious with a blood choke than get suffocated. Like, I think being suffocated is more uncomfortable than the blood choke, actually.
Yeah. You don't feel it. That's the thing. So yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So the main reason you're on the podcast today is because I discovered Scorpion Throne. And with that, I thought it was like really great black metal textures that you're putting together. However, once I delved really into Tombs, I'm seeing a lot of the same kind of textural components in Tombs that are in Scorpion Throne. However, the other members in Scorpion Throne are different than Tombs, other than the drummer is an ex-member of Tombs. So why did you want to put Scorpion Throne together while you have Tombs going on?
I mean, Scorpion Throne is more of a project kind of band. You know, I don't imagine us playing live ever. It's more of I just wanted to do something different. And I had a bunch of material that, you know, just felt like it belonged somewhere else, you know, and not necessarily as Tombs, you know, material. So, yeah, I'm always working on stuff, you know what I mean? And just something that's more personal, I guess, which sounds ironic since, you know, I'm the only remaining member of Tombs was on the first album, and the band has always been very personal, but this is just something that was, had more of an open-ended kind of vibe to it, where there's like, you know, I can make like an electronic record and call it Scorpion Thrones, or I can make an ambient record and call it that, you know, or I could make what I just put out. I mean, there's a lot of material that is still in the works right now that's even more different than the stuff that we have on that 4-song offering that just came out. I originally was even thinking about just doing with like programmed drums and playing all the instruments myself and just, you know, really have it as a solo project. But I realized I kind of missed playing with Andrew, and he and I are, you know, really tight friends. And I just asked him, I said, you know, rather than me trying to make beats, why don't you play drums on it? And he was like, yeah, I'd love to play, you know, start working together again. And then same thing with bass. It's like my friend Mike G plays in a bunch of bands over here in the New York, New Jersey area. You know, Windfarer is a great band. Replicant, Future Sentient is a band that he does with my drummer Justin from Tombs. He's just a guy that like we always talk about music. We always have a lot of the same interests, and I just asked him if he wanted to play bass on it, and so that's how the core of the band formed. I'd already had the 4 songs written, and you know, Andrew lives in Ithaca, New York, and he was able to record his drums up there. And then Mike recorded everything at home. He sent me the bass tracks, and Justin, the Tombs drummer, he mixed everything. And yeah, just like a friend, you know, friend thing, like family project. You know, it's all people that are friends, and I guess that's was really what was important to me, was where it was like a very brotherly experience, you know, and you know, the songs themselves, like they were very dark, and you know, and I'm the kind of person who's like, I'm the go it alone kind of guy. Like I don't reach out to people really when I have like hard times. And in a way, I guess this was like a way for me to reach out to my friends and you know, kind of weather this like particularly hard period I was going through.
I see. So
it's interesting that just because the Scorpion Throne EP, like it is clearly rooted in black metal, but it's quite, I guess the word would be experimental, although I don't like using that term because it's a bit vague. But it is, you know, it has a real character of its own that's not quite like anything that I could place off the cuff. So yeah, again, was that kind of like a spontaneous process, or did you set out deliberately sort of from a point of creative freedom, something very different to Tombs?
Yeah, well, that was the only criteria, was that it had to be different than what I was doing with Tombs. And you know, but I mean, obviously, since I'm the one writing the material, it's like obviously there's going to be a similarity to it. But I think that was the criteria. Like I have like, I mean, I can look on my hard drive. There's 25 songs that I wrote for this project. and I picked 4. So it's like, I just went through the whole thing, and I had this very, very tight criteria, and things that didn't sound like they belonged with Tombs, I wanted to make into this project. And whatever turned out that I felt strongly about was what ended up on the 4 songs. And, there's some of this stuff. I'm actually surprised that people, to me, it doesn't really sound like black metal. It's like, to me, there's like, I hear like, more of like a Sam Hain kind of vibe, like more of like a, like Swans or like Death in June or something, I mean, what do I know? You know what I mean? I just like, that's what I was thinking, but if other people interpret it differently, that's totally cool too.
I think I wouldn't say it's typical black metal by any measure, but it's definitely kind of rooted in that. But when you mention Swans or Death in June, I can definitely get that vibe as well. I'd call it like glum rather than grim, I suppose.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. Yeah. I was sort of channeling my British countryside music. It's funny, like that style, like that Death in June style, is to me very British. And that's all. All the post-punk stuff I like is definitely very front and center in this material, and that's all I associate that with the UK.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's kind of made for like damp weather, grey skies. Yep. Just miserable parks and industrial estates. Yeah, yep, and that's what we get with Death in June.
So speaking about black metal, being that, I view Scorpion Throne being, quite rooted in black metal, and I thought the textural components were really good. But what are your thoughts on black metal in general? Do you view it as like the most artistic form of extreme metal, if that makes sense? Because I kind of do. I view that, death metal is so, there's so many complex riffs and all of that, and black metal just throws that all out of the window, makes more about feeling and expression. Do you view that as more as artistic than other metal genres?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that right now, black metal is like at a very, very good spot, in its development, because there's so many different bands all over the world making great music. There's a whole bunch of Australian bands that are incredible, in my opinion. Like the Amenta is an incredible band from Australia, and they're creating music that's like so experimental and forward thinking and unique. And there's tons of great, even some bands that started in the 90s are making great music now too. Like Blue House Nord, their new record is amazing. I just think right now it's a wide open field and people are comfortable with expressing themselves and not being tied into this kind of orthodoxy that death metal unfortunately has that. However, death metal also, there's a ton of bands like Grave Miasma that are like really pushing the boundaries of that style of music too. Like they're clearly a death metal band, but they have, this very, very grim like sound, and they have texture, and it's not just riffing and a million miles a minute blast beats and that sort of thing. And I just think very atmospheric. Yeah, totally. And that's like the main thing. Like for me at this stage, I'm really looking to create an atmosphere. I want to play the parts well and be a good musician and all that, but atmosphere is really the big thing for me right now.
I see. So that's interesting. So with black metal, and especially like Scorpion Throne, and there's a lot of black metal elements in Tombs as well, but Tombs is, like I was saying earlier, like a mass assimilation of a lot of different influences. And I read in one interview that like you were really influenced by Emperor at one point. So were you I know you don't want to mimic like the Scandinavian black metal scene at all, but do you still kind of draw parallels from that with what you're creating of Scorpion Throne?
Not so much with Scorpion Throne. I mean, honestly, it's like, most people, at least the last few years, categorize Tombs as a USBM band. I mean, we're, recently appeared in a book about US black metal. So, I mean, I don't know if like, maybe some of that post metal nonsense is falling to the wayside at this point. I mean, Emperor, I would actually say Emperor has been more of an influence on Tombs, and more Gothic elements, and Jeff Whitehead specifically in the United States has been an influence on Scorpion Throne. Jeff Whitehead, in my opinion, is the most important guy to modern black metal, more so even than like Emperor, in my opinion. I mean, that guy has pioneered music in ways that those bands and those artists, aren't even able to do things like the stuff that Whitehead has done. And, I think that Jeff is more of a profound influence on me than any of the original Scandinavian bands are at this point in my life, and that's just kind of how you move past all that stuff. I started listening to black metal in the early 90s, when I read an article about, Burzum, and it was like, wow, this sounds like really cool, interesting, evil stuff. And, that was like the point in my life where I was like getting into like, reading about Satanism and, Aleister Crowley and Thelema and like all this other, occult sort of things. And, Norse mythology and paganism and all that stuff was like very much in the forefront. And that's what attracted me to black metal back then. But as time went on creatively, a lot of those artists like just stagnated, and just stayed in that one particular era. Like I said, guys like Jeff Whitehead and bands like the Amenta from Australia, are really pushing things in a direction that's new and unique.
Would you say part of that appeal is a function of maybe being in a more urban environment? So a lot of the Scandinavian bands, they're invoking either sort of Norse mythology or nature or the occult in some way. But the striking thing that American black metal bands brought to the fore in the 2000s onwards, Leviathan included, was using the same kind of techniques and textures, but making it much more, urban, concrete alienation rather than alienation in sort of the natural world or things beyond our immediate experience. And working in, elements of industrial and post-punk at the same time as well. So would you say the appeal kind of sits partly in the experiences of the musicians as well?
Yeah, I think there's definitely truth to that. I mean, it's living in an urban environment, New York City and, other cities across the world. You're not necessarily isolated physically from people. You're isolated like emotionally from things. And, that could be one of the key elements in the way that more modern US black metal has progressed. I mean, of course, there's like bands like Wolves in the Throne Room who are like, they're into nature and all this sort of stuff. But I think in general, the music that really resonates with me has that sort of urban alienation sort of vibe to it, anxiety, fear, these like dark streets. That whole thing is a very, very much part of the experience, I think, in modern like US black metal.
Also, I kind of draw a parallel that you're talking about Jeff Whitehead. I view his music as very introspective, as I do yours and other USBM artists. Whereas you look at the second wave of black metal going from Norway, a lot of those guys, they wanted to come up with their own form of music, essentially, and it was really an outward expression with that, because they wanted to challenge what was the standard of death metal and show that it's like, no, death metal is too fun. We need to be more serious with our music. And it was like this outward expression with the second wave. Whereas, it's been so many years since that in USBM, there's so many different gradations of what USBM is, but I kind of view like a lot of it is very introspective, not necessarily urban. But yes, there could be an urban aspect to that, but more of like not liking being around, the cityscapes and mundane reality where, there's all these concrete cities and no heat sinks, things like that. But I view it as, a lot of USVM as very introspective. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I totally agree with that. And it's less like the second wave, I think, was like reacting, like a reactionary kind of thing, where they were like, okay, well, there are bands like Morbid Angel and whatever, like doing their thing. They got full color painted record covers or whatever. I mean, even though Morbid Angel to me is a pretty grim band, especially the, Authors of Madness and Blessed Are the Sick, those are, great records. And I think anything that came out post 2000 is not so hung up on reacting to death metal, and trying to, be anti-death metal and just use black and white imagery or whatever, having crappy recordings. Like, that's kind of like, that's not really the vibe, it's trying to express internal darkness and create something to the best of your ability, and not necessarily, and if you're the best of your ability is like with your laptop at home, that's fine. That's okay. But if you want to create like in an auditory sense, this totally crushing album that has all these technical ability being showcased, that's also valid too. There isn't like, okay, we can only play these 3 chords in our songs because, I mean, I get it from back then, but now it's like 20 years later, at least, actually more like 30 years later. And, you can't have this orthodox approach to the music, otherwise you're just going to be like a rockabilly group that's playing Elvis riffs, or something like that. That's how I see it, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the sort of aspects of, I mean, it's been kind of uncharitably called bedroom black metal because people record it in their bedroom on a laptop. But again, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that if that's the means by which someone can express themselves and it resonates. But it's interesting that, especially since black metal got over its kind of being its bonnet about death metal, a lot of the key artists fell into sort of making ambient music because they've found it a more a freer kind of form of expression, because you're not limited to, the particular guitar tone that you have to get for black metal and the blast beats and the vocals and so on. You have much more freedom to explore sounds and textures and how they can be built up. And again, that's kind of how I would listen to a lot of more modern black metal, is because it's far less riff focused. It's more focused on atmosphere. I find it much more enjoyable if I approach it like an ambient album rather than a metal album, one that's designed, like composed and designed to be listened to at home. It's not designed to be played live or be like a band experience. It's more like a soundscape experience.
I dig that for sure. I mean, and that's, some of those bands that I love, like, Leviathan, Zaster, that's especially Zaster too. I mean, Zaster, to me, a lot of that sounds like, very ambient oriented. There's like slow tempos, and this, everything just, it exists in this like weird cavernous, like, soundscape basically.
Yeah, on the documentary One Man Metal, where Zasker appears, I do remember him saying in that interview that even if he was required to play live, he couldn't remember the songs because he sort of writes and records immediately. And again, that kind of, there's kind of a purity to that I quite enjoy. It's quite spontaneous, and it's kind of fits the way that he composes perfectly, rather than, spending hours trying to sort of relearn the songs for a live setting, because they weren't designed for that.
Yeah, I responded to that too, because, in a band that tours and everything, you spend a lot of time rehearsing and putting a set list together and, doing the songs over and over again so you can perform them live. And if you don't ever perform live like that song really is a window into like a very specific node in your life. And you may never, as an artist, revisit that point again. You know what I mean? And I think that's really interesting. That's an interesting environment, really, and yeah, I mean, I listen to those records all the time. So for me as a listener, it's like part of my reality. But as a creator, like, Jeff Whitehead or the guy in Zaster, it's like, that's over. That's part of the past. And they probably don't even think about those songs anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, on the flip side, like, older bands who are live bands who have been going 30, 40 years, you tend to end up resenting the songs that you wrote when you were a kid and having to still play them like over and over again. But just to go back to Tombs, we did discuss like the mesh of influences, but one of the ones I got was sludge metal as well. I wondered if you have any kind of views or relationships to that, sort of going all the way back to bands like Neurosis and so on.
Oh yeah, 100%. Neurosis is like they're have always been a huge influence on me. It's funny to think. I think of them as like punks. You know what I mean? Like they're these like kind of like East Bay guys, that are punk rock dudes, and they just were pushing their music in their own unique direction. Like they're pioneers, really. I mean, if you think about how they started out, and then they make records like, Enemy of the Sun, it's like,
well, yeah, like they started as a hardcore punk band, didn't they? Their first album is pretty straight up punk, like.
Yeah, punk rock, like crust kind of guys. Yeah.
But yeah, like that style was very influential on the metal scene on both sides of the Atlantic from the late 2000s on. And I remember at the time just not being very interested in it because I was fixated on black metal. That's my wheelhouse. But everyone was into either the sludge metal or what's loosely referred to as post metal, or like the stoner rock stuff as well. And it's something I've come to appreciate a bit more recently, but it's also, I don't know if it's waning in popularity now, but it was huge around like the late 2000s, early 2010s. Like, yeah, just that seemed to be the vibe that metal was in at that time.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, Neurosis, like probably the height for them, I think career wise, their height was like mid 90s, like 97, 98, when Through Silver and Blood was out and they were doing Ozfest and touring with Pantera and doing all this crazy stuff. And that's probably when they actually crossed over into metalheads, world, because, prior to that, Neurosis was like, touring with bands that were like on Alternative Tentacles and, kind of like these noise rock, like they would tour like Unsane or something like that, and when they started doing these bigger high profile metal tours, I think that's when it started sinking in with metalheads, that this is actually something viable. Yeah,
definitely. They sort of have that crossover appeal where they could sort of span a lot of different scenes and kind of reach out like that. The other band I was thinking of, I was just reminded that I saw Neurosis a couple of years ago in London, but they were supported by Godflesh as well.
Oh man, yeah.
Have that crossover appeal where I meet like goths or just fans straight up indie that are huge fans of Godflesh or fans of electronica as well, but they're still very much within the metal milieu as well.
Yeah, it's weird. We played with Godflesh in the States here. They did like 3 shows in the United States, and then we played the New York date with them. And their fans are a lot different than I thought they would be. Actually, it's yeah. I mean, I got into Godflesh when they were like an Earache band. They would tour like Napalm Death and like death metal people like Godflesh, and so I'm approaching it more from that, And then like when we toured, we didn't tour with them. We just did that one date. We played in New York with them. It was like a very like a crowd that probably knew nothing about death metal or metal at all. There were people that were there that were interested in us, but by and large, it's a Godflesh show. And, we were direct support, but like, it was mostly their fans, obviously, and there was like people who were like, what's all this bullshit like on stage? I was like, wow, what a surprise, man. I was like, I remember seeing Godflesh like open, play with like Obituary and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's weird, that, because whenever I've seen them in the UK and Europe, like they're in a metal context, like their crowd is very much metalheads, or they play metal festivals. They're always like, the outlier band, because obviously they have, the drum machine and the very like harsh industrial sound, but it's very much like a metal experience still. But I have always been aware that they have that broad appeal as well. And I think that I always put them on that list of like metal bands for non-metalheads, because non-metalheads sometimes find the either the textures of black metal too alienating or the riff salad of death metal too dense, whereas the bands that we're discussing tend to create a bit more space and a bit more of a breathing space for the listener to kind of immerse themselves, whereas death metal, there's no entry point. You just have to kind of dive in, I suppose.
Well, Shelly, can I add on to that? Back another Air Force story. I was dating a girl while I was living in Japan, and she liked the band Tool. I'm like, well, Tool ripped off Godflesh. Here's Street Cleaner, and she dug that. So that's someone who wouldn't be necessarily metal in our eyes that was able to get into the Godflesh. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Pitch Shifter? I recently rediscovered that band and their industrial album, which is total Godflesh worship. Have you heard that, Mike?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have that record. It's cool, but like it is a very heavily influenced a record that, I mean, it's a Godflesh record, really. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, it's cool. Like I have it, I back that band, I've seen them live like back, years ago. I support their, ability to go out there and do things, but really let's be honest here. It's a very, very, it's a Godflesh record. You know what I'm trying to say? So
Godflesh clone band or something like that. Like,
yeah, like, but they're good though. Like I still like their songs though. It's cool. I mean, it's just not incredibly, original, shall we say?
The thing about Pitch Shifter is the moment they started to sound more like themselves and not Godflesh with their second album, Desensitized, they started to bring more like Ministry influences in as well. But I still think it's a good album. It's a good, catchy, kind of groovy industrial metal album. But the more they found their identity, the more they kind of fell into the new metal trap, which is a bit of a curse for them, which is a shame because they could have been quite a nice accompaniment to Godflesh. But yeah, I won't labor that point too much, I suppose.
Yes, no, totally. Yeah, but Tool, I like Tool as well. I mean, the first time I saw Tool, they were opening for the Rollins band, and I was like, this band's kind of interesting. They got really good drummer. They got like this dude. This like skinny dude with like funny haircut, like the singer, and he's singing. I don't know. I thought they were pretty cool. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan, but I admire their creativity, and they do interesting music, I think.
Well, they're another like ambiguous band, I guess, in that a good chunk of metalheads like them, but they do have that cross appeal. Like I've never been a fan, but I don't resent them, but they are a good like crossover band where people will either get into metal through them or people will kind of experience the metal scene via Tool because they have that crossover appeal amongst like fans of all sorts of genres will probably like them. So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So I do have a couple more questions. What are your thoughts on elitism, Mike?
Elitism. Like, do you think you want me to answer the question as, am I an elitist, or do I think that people are elitists? My thoughts on.
From my perspective, I had never heard of Tombs until I invited you on this podcast.
Okay.
I might be considered an elitist because I'm more into like the old school death metal, second wave black metal, things of that ilk. And, I had to really approach your music with an open mind to appreciate it. And, that took some effort on my end because, I'm so used to the forms that I'm used to. And, I had to, the first time I heard Tombs, I'm like, well, this sounds like, either Triptychon, Belphegor, things of that ilk. And, and then I just sat down and listened. I'm like, where are all these influences coming from? Then I had to start wrapping my mind around it. And then I was able to pinpoint specific things. But as a whole, like we were talking about earlier, like your songwriting capability is top notch, is up there with the best.
Well, thank you.
And, say for my instance, say I never came around to liking Tombs because I'm so entrenched in the quote unquote like old school death metal and second wave black metal, things of that nature. What are your thoughts about people like that?
Well, you miss out on a lot of cool things, I think, in life, really. It's like, I never identified with any of that because I always liked a lot of different things, and it's like, I like all kinds of music. So I never felt like I could relate to being an elitist in any way, really. I mean, I'm an elitist because I like good music, music that I like, but I've always been open to things, and I guess that's why I can never understand people that I only like technical metal, or something like that, which I actually experienced that on the Origin tour. There are kids who only listen to technical metal. They just like Archspire and like Origin and, Allegiant, like bands like that. And I'm like, man, don't you want to listen to I don't care, honestly. Like at the end of the day, it really has nothing to do with me. It's like, I like what I like. If it's, I listen to Twin Tribes, I listen to Triptychon, I listen to Celtic Frost, I listen to Joy Division, whatever. I listen to, Lebanon, Hanover, like all these bands that have nothing to do with each other. But yeah, I just feel like it's you're selling yourself short by only being into one thing, And I think that eventually you probably get bored and give up on music completely. It's like if you only have this very myopic viewpoint, you might get bored. And, someday you'll wish that you did check out some of this other stuff,
I think it's important.
I'm not speaking to you directly. I'm speaking to one would miss out on things, if they weren't more open.
Yeah. I think it's important to distinguish between elitism, closed-mindedness and quality control. So someone that's closed-minded might be someone that just listens to technical death metal or just listens to war metal or whatever.
Yeah.
And those kind of people I don't really understand because, as you say, you're shutting yourself off to a whole wealth of experiences. But then there's that some people confuse that with people that have quality control. I have no problem saying if I think music's shit, if I know why I think it's shit.
Sure.
And if it's clearly not aimed at me, then fine, whatever. But if I think it's doing a disservice to music or it's a lower quality version of something that is already out there and does really better, people might call that elitist, but I call that quality control. I'm just saying that I have tastes. I think that some music is better than other kinds of music, or some bands are better than other bands. And I have no problem just arguing about that. It's not my word isn't final. I don't think I have any more authority than anyone else, but there is a discussion around that, I think. And when terms, I know someone mentioned it earlier, but when terms like hipster get thrown around, I think terms like that have kind of lost all meaning because I've been called a hipster. I've called people hipster, which means it's kind of just a term that people throw around when they're kind of given up on discussing stuff now. But I think there's still space in there to sort of say some music is disingenuous or poor quality and some music is not.
Yeah. I mean, I lived in Brooklyn during the height of, the quote unquote hipster, era. So, I don't know. I just think it's funny. Like I understand, that, but I guess in some ways I am a hipster. I like craft beer, I like, good coffee, stuff like that.
I was wondering about that because I know the hardcore scene is really popular up there, as is like the straight edge scene, or used to be. I was wondering if you're straight edge or not. You just answered that because you at least like beer, whether it be in craft beer or whatever, but you like beer, so it's really cool.
Hey, I like a craft beer as well. And a good
yeah.
That warm beer you gave me in Leeds, I believe, was one of the worst I've ever had.
That wasn't craft beer. That was a good English real ale. That's a very different thing. That's the raging debate in the beer scene in the UK is trying to imitate US craft beer or trying to stick with traditional warm English ale. And the debate rages on. It's kind of similar, with a similar kind of toxicity to debates in metal, if I'm being honest. So
I think there's room for both, actually. I mean,
there is. I like both.
Yeah. I mean, just to answer your question, hardcore has like no real meaning to me in my life. Honestly, it's like maybe when I was a kid, I was into hardcore. It's like obviously Black Flag is like one of my favorite bands, and that's pretty much where it ends. I mean, I like Yeah, I mean, like hardcore is not important to me at all, really. I mean, I don't listen to hardcore. Like I appreciate first couple Cro-Mags records and you know, I never go see hardcore bands unless they're friends, you know, like one of my, you know, some of my friends playing bands like that, I'll go see them, but I don't have anything to do with that scene. And, you know, as far as like straight edge, it's like, the conformity of all that stuff is like, no, I don't like conforming to anything, man. It's like, I'm not a big partier. Like I don't party, you know what I mean? But I do appreciate quality, you know, things like a nice beer here and there. So I don't know. I just like, I do my own thing, man. Like that's really what it comes down to. It's like, I don't, you know, hardcore music is like very, I don't know. It just seems very regimented and I don't know. I don't know. It seems very uninclusive in some ways too. So I don't know.
So I was I was Googling you for a few days, like various things you've been involved with, just to be prepared for this interview.
Mhm.
And I ended up on Everything Went Black Media Bandcamp, I believe, and I saw like live touring journal entries that you did spoken word to, and one recurring theme throughout that was you're talking about like the punk kids, whatever, just there for the beers and all that. So it's kind of
Sure.
went through a perhaps a straight edge kind of persona, the way I was approaching.
No, I mean, it's not, it's more about like being a wasted piece of shit as opposed to someone who has control of himself, you know, like that's really where I'm coming from with that stuff. You know, it's like you know, if you drink to excess and you have no control of yourself, then that's something that I find repulsive, really, you know, but that's like what it comes down to, having personal discipline about how you conduct yourself. You know, I mean, you don't need people as rules. If you have, seeing this ties into like my sort of like, you know, Crowleyan idea of how to live your life, you know, where you create your own sort of rules and you adhere to that. And that's how you should conduct yourself, you know?
Yeah, I definitely Shelly's seen me completely fucking shit faced, but I don't think I ever like burned down any buildings or anything like that. So yeah,
So you have your own, you have your code of conduct that you have, and you stick to it. That's like,
we could ask Shelly about that. Shelly, did you get rubbed the wrong way when I was trashed?
I think I myself was too drunk to notice, so you're all good. And I didn't get a phone call from the police in the next few days, so I don't think we did any problems.
Cool. So I do have one last question. Shelly's, you know, more than welcome to raise more, but just seeing that you're a lifer in the metal, you know, you've been involved with it for so long. At any point, did you feel any like disillusionment with like the underground music industry or anything like that?
not really. I mean, I just am really just dialed into what I want to do, really. Like I don't look at the bigger picture ever. You know, it's you know, right now we're fortunate to be doing cool things and, you know, put out records on a nice record label. You know, Season of Mist is great. You know, we've been on Relapse Records. We finished our obligation with them years ago. And, you know, it's one, you know, you just got to keep that continuum going. And, you know, we get nice tour offers, we get to play festivals, and, you know, as long as that's something that's great, but not necessary for me to continue doing what I'm doing. You know, it's like, I'm always going to be making music, and I don't really have, I mean, I guess from the beginning of this band, I was just like, well, let's see what happens. I wasn't like, oh yeah, we're going to get a booking agent and sign to this label and make $1 million and get all these fans. You know, I mean, I never really looked at that as like a goal. It was just more making music, you know. And I know that sounds like bullshit because it's everyone's answer. Oh, I make music for myself, but you have to do that first, before anyone else appreciates what you're doing, really, you know. And I guess, you know, if we get dropped by Season of Mist, I'm not going to break the band up. I'm still going to make music, you know, just put it out on Bandcamp. You know, that's pretty much how things go with me.
Well, I'm sure, like, you know, other than Tombs, that you've written music where, you know, it's very personal, very meaningful to you, and never actually gained any traction. Like, how'd you feel after that? I know Tombs has had great successes and all that, but there had to be some growing pains before Tombs?
To be honest with you, pretty much all the things that I put out there, people seem to like. So on some level, before Tombs, I was in a band called Versoma. We made one record. We did a tour with ISIS. It was like pretty cool. People still talk to me about the record, even though I don't really think it's that great. Prior to that, I was in a band called Anodyne, which people to this day are still interested in for some reason. And Scorpion Throne, I put it out there just because why not? And I'm surprised anyone likes it, to be honest. But people seem to enjoy that as well. So, I mean, I don't know. I just I'm just saying that's the truth of the matter. Like I make music for myself that other people seem to enjoy. And that's great. That's an added bonus to the creation of that stuff, and I appreciate people enjoying the music, but there are people out there, and I'm not going to name names, but they will spend all day long Googling their name to see who says what about them, or is this person paying attention to my stuff, or like who's tagging me or hashtagging me, and I just don't have time to do that stuff, man. I do what I do. I enjoy what I'm doing. I'm having fun doing it. I appreciate anyone out there who cares enough, because I put a lot of effort into this stuff, but it's like, if there's 5 people that like it, that's great. And if there's 500 people that like it, that's also great, but I don't necessarily pander or try to I don't actively try to expand my audience, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? I just keep doing what I'm doing. Like, if people like it, that's cool. And if they don't, that's also cool too.
I think some cliches are cliches for a reason, and that point around making music that you enjoy making personally, and if it resonates, then great. I think that's one of those cliches where it is that because it's true for a lot of people. And as someone that writes about a lot of new music, I can appreciate stuff that isn't necessarily stuff that I would personally like, if I can get a sense that it's sincere and it's come from a good place. And I think that's all I ever ask of music at the end of the day. And stuff that's insincere or comes from a cynical place, that's pandering to a certain thing, that's the only time when it doesn't sit well with me. But even if it's a genre or style or whatever that doesn't vibe with me, I can still, recognize its value, because it's come from a place of sincerity and honesty. And at the end of the day, that's all we really expect of music, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same way. I mean, nowadays, one of the great things about the modern streaming world is you can find out about tons of bands. And I found so many bands just through listening to podcasts, like Into the Necrosphere, which is one of my favorite podcasts, and turned on to so many great bands. And it literally is on the quality of their music, not how many people like them or who writes about them. A lot of these bands have no press at all. I just hear about them through word of mouth or being associated through other bands that I like. And then I listen to stuff and I'm like, oh, this is great. And it's completely this very objective way of finding music. And it has nothing to do with popularity or which guy was in what other band or any of that kind of stuff. And I really like that.
Very cool. Very cool. So I have ran out of questions today. We have reached that hour mark. So I do want to thank you very much for coming on the program today, Mike. I will be playing a Scorpion Throne song after this episode is concluded, so people can check that out and see what that's about. So thank you very much for coming on the program today.
Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. And Shelly, always a great pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Awesome chat, guys.
All right, gentlemen. Have a good day. Take care.